Well, hello everybody, this is Tim Green with Rattle Magazine, and welcome to your Critique of the Week. It is Friday, April 4th, 2025. Thanks so much for joining me. Let's see who we got in the crowd. Jerry Stephenson is here, Patty Arbor, Steve Harrell, Lynn Schilling, Brian O'Sullivan here. We're going to get to Brian's poems first. So get prepared, Brian. He's got an Emily Dickinson one that I have up right now, Without Feathers. Dick Westheimer's here, Dr. Q, Tom Barlow, Rose Lennard, Dee Coleman is here, Morgan Feeney, David Boos, Tom Barlow, Jamie Thomas, Desi Cochrane, Winston Munn, Rose Lennard, I said already, Hemet Malik is here, Maney, Rachel Grieve, Leah Watson, Sharon Ferrante's here, Hillary Plattner, CLAS, nice, Ali Rowland's here, Kimberly Gibson Tran, Sandra Fees, yeah, we got a great Chris, Nancy Tunnell, Lauren Bennett, Erica, I don't want to miss anybody, PMB is here. Great to see you all. Well, once again, time for another critique of the week, and what we do is provide the great workshop experience that MFA programs provide, all free right here, where we sit around our big round table and just talk about these poems. We'll read them. You know, the poet might be here. Maybe we can get some feedback at the end, but we're just sitting here looking at how we interpret the poems, what works, what doesn't, what resonates, what leaves us flat, where we start to daydream. Suggestions for structure, for shape, different forms, you know, lines that don't work, anything you think when you read a poem. Share them in the chat window. I'll pass along as many comments as possible. Let's see. Yeah, and if you'd like to submit, I should say, if you're new, because we do have some new viewers, we're sending a lot of decline letters over that. So we're really catching up on submissions right now, which is really nice, but that means a lot more decline letters and a lot more people here maybe. So if you're unfamiliar with this, we don't just pick poems at random. It's not regular submissions that we're pulling out of the queue and exposing it publicly. This is only if you want the feedback. If you want to become a better writer, this is the best way to do it. Not only having your poems up, but participating and seeing other poems and seeing what people think about other poems, how they react, you know, what works. And so so if you'd like to do that, all you got to do is go to rattle.com/page/ is that right? I'm still a little confused with the new website. It's rattle.com/ well, here, let me put it up on the screen so you can look with me. You go to, there you go. You go to up here in the content. We go to Critique of the Week. That URL is, rattle.com/page/critique. You know, you can put your critique in here. There's the most recent video, and then click to submit. All you got to do is set 2 poems. And once you send 2 poems, then you'll be in the queue. And if you're someone who participates regularly, we'll try to get you soon. It'll be maybe a week or 2 wait. If you're somebody who we don't recognize as somebody who helps here, then you're just in the back of the line, but we'll get to you eventually. And that's really a great way to become a better poet. And that's what we all want to do, hopefully. So thanks, everybody, for participating. All right, so let's start it, like I said, with Brian O'Sullivan, who, of course, is involved in so much of what we do. Brian's one of our favorite personalities here. He's a part of the Poetry Space Squad, Katie Dozier's podcast. Joins us frequently there. He's also, you know, here you see him on the Rattlecast a lot and in the Critique of the Week. Let's see. We'll talk about these 2 poems separately. So first, and there's a space, I should say, for general questions when you submit, and so you can leave, you know, suggestions or questions, things you'd like us to focus on. And with this, Brian says, Without Feathers was written for the prompt that called for a pantoum, referencing a shape. It's a poem about a real person who may or may not have actually been named Hope, whom I met a long time ago, and I'm curious whether you all will feel that I'm telling her story clearly enough, and whether she comes across as an actual human and not only a personification. I'd also love advice on how to make better use of the pantoum form, and how it could be a better after poem, or really, whatever you want to talk about. All right, so here is the poem, and a pantoum. If you don't remember what a pantoum is, I'll put this on screen. The pantoum, I guess we can zoom in a little bit. Hang on. a little bigger. There we go. So the pantoum is the second line right here. The second line and the fourth line of each stanza become the first line and the third line of the next stanza. And you can go on as long as you want. There's a certain length that's like the traditional pantoum length, which I can never remember because hardly anybody follows that part of the rule. But you can go through and as long as you want doing that. So it's a form that's great for repetition. And it's fun to sort of vary and play with the way those lines change. Because you sort of hear the pattern, you hear the things coming back, and it's really nice to hear it coming back, but coming back in a different way. So especially if you can turn, use slight edits to turn, verbs, change the way that things are used, things like that. It's a really great form to play with on that level. A lot of a form that's fun to tinker with after and see how far you can push the repetition. And then it's a good form for things that are kind of obsessive topics because you have a lot of repetition. So that's the pantoum. And here is Without Feathers after Emily Dickinson. I was sitting in a plastic chair playing Scrabble with an aide while Hope was perched on one of the shabby couches. Yes, perched is the word. She was like a squawky bird. Sorry, 1 second, everybody. Yeah, too loud in my ear. Okay. Yes, perched is the word. She was like a squawky bird, with her slender frame, her beaky nose, her squint. Hope was perched on one of the shabby couches, exclaiming to everyone that she was glad that she, with her slender frame, her beaky nose, her squint, was going to fly free of this short-term facility. Exclaiming to everyone that she was glad that her caseworkers and nurses and shrink had finally said she was going to fly free of this short-term facility where her short-term stay had been getting longer. Her caseworkers and nurses and shrink had finally said she'd be transferred to Creedmoor, my Scrabble tile spelled warehoused, as her short-term stay had been getting longer. No one had been able to or wanted to take her in. She'd be squared away at Creedmoor, the aide's tile spelled woeful. Even here, people had little patience to offer hope. No one had been able to, or wanted to, take her into our little circles of friends and allies and frenemies. Even here, people had little patience to offer hope, badly as it was needed. We weren't sure we could trust it. To our little circles of friends and allies and frenemies, hope could seem a little alien, a little obnoxious. Badly as we feared hope was sure she needed it. They said that Hope's whining never stopped at all. Hope could seem a little alien, a little obnoxious. They used to call her hopeless, but I realized that, though they said Hope's whining never stopped at all, she sought hope and had a home, even at Creedmoor. They used to call her hopeless, but decades later, when I'm discouraged, I still find myself remembering how she sought hope in a home, even at Creedmoor. With my Scrabble tiles, I spelled example. When I'm discouraged, I still find myself remembering how hope might make its home on the starkest perch. Well, that's very nice. One of the things, too, that you see frequently is that the last line of the pantoum coming back and becoming the first line again. And it's not done here, but it's a note about the form. So I think the story is told pretty clearly, except I think... I'd like a little bit more backstory on Hope to work its way in. That you're there, but like, why are you there? Playing Scrabble with Hope. Tabrell says, "Love the culminating turn." Yeah, I do too. I really like the wordplay and the use of the form. I think it comes through. The repetitions work really well. There's slight changes that keep it interesting. I really like the use of Scrabble tiles spelling and then spelling different things throughout, which is really nice too. Desi Calcrane says, with the pantoums, I always wonder why it needs to be a pantoum. And because it has this reverberating quality, this kind of obsessive, you're going over and like weaving things together. There's some really wonderful pantoums, and that's how. And this is a comment I was going to see if anyone said. I love how the story is told. This is Jesse A. But I agree that with Kimberly that many hope words in that one stanza trip me up. Yeah, and me too. I sort of started tripping. Yeah, Kimberly Gibson Tran said that first, starting to stumble a bit on the many hope words in one stanza. Yeah, it was that stanza down here. Was it, I think, this one? Where it just got to be too much. Like the play with hope and hopeless, and moving and using that and playing with that within the pantoum is really nice. But I think it gets to be a little bit too much for me there in those sections, or in a few sections. Let's see. Yeah. And then, Kimberly Gibson Tran says, I feel like this poem captures the pantoum's feeling of being captured. Yeah, and the thing with the pantoum is you sort of you get to wondering how long it goes on, and it feels like you feel the repetition. And it's great for enacting something that's like a repetitive topic, and being trapped as Hope is here in the story, in the home, and thinking somewhere it says, thinking it was going to be a short stay, and then it ended up not being a short stay. And so I think that's why the form really works. Lynn Schilling says, I'm not sure the Scrabble words are needed. And to me, I wondered, I think having these things stretch out, it's really hard to edit a pantoum, which is one of the difficulties of the form. Like it's sort of not that hard to write, but then once you get it out, like one changes like the entire cascade of interwoven repetitions. And so it's really hard to edit after the fact, which makes pantoums tricky, except for like small edits to like change phrases and stuff. But once you get into full sentences that cut across the lines within Gem, it really gets tricky to edit. But one of the things I was thinking is, having the end words here, where it changes after the line break, it feels like this would be better if we move that down and found a way to get those down, and then it gives you more opportunities. Like if you said, she be transferred to Creedmoor, my Scrabble tiles spelled, and then warehoused, and then you ended up, warehoused ends up being the only word repeated within the form. I guess it would have to be up higher, but you know what I mean. Like you can here. So you would, I guess it's not the right, it's not the right one for that, but you can, if you split this warehoused off, it feels a little like it stands out because you're used to, if there are going to be repetitions, the last word being repeated. So it gets a little bit sort of muddled. It would be fun, I think, if you could possibly make a line break here and then move the poem along that way. And that's a tough thing to suggest, but I think it would be really cool. If you managed to pull that off, and I think it would make there's sort of different things to go. And a lot of times we talk about with poems, just capturing the story and how important that is, and just having a human connection, like telling us what you're trying to tell us and what your subconscious is trying to tell us does so much. But then there's this other level where you're sort of amazing people and making it like, wow, they pulled that off. And there's some poems that are just great, and it's sort of great on one level because you follow the story and you feel emotionally invested in it. But then on another level, you're like, whoa, it's inspiring that somebody could write that. And I think if you played more with this and made it like a more difficult use of that, it would make the poem, sort of like anthology level quality, possibly. So that's one thing I'd think if you're gonna like deeply tinker with it. I think that's a real opportunity to, and then what you end up doing is splitting, because you end up only repeating half of the line. So you would repeat this, but not this. And here you did something else. So it makes perfect sense, if you're following me. Let's see. Dick Westheimer says, Brian, I admire the way the form's repetition works here, but I'd aim to shorten the lines by a beat or two as an example. Beaky nose could be beak. Yeah. Okay. Well, let me go through again line by line. Let's look at it a little more closely. Okay. Without feathers. So after Emily Dickinson, and of course that's the hope is a thing with feathers, that Emily Dickinson quote it's written after. I was sitting in a plastic chair playing Scrabble with an aide while Hope was perched on one of the shabby couches. Yes, perched is the word. She was like a squawky bird. I think one of the things we mention occasionally is that metaphors straight are stronger than similes. I think maybe just calling her a squawky bird is a stronger way to do it. So she was a squawky bird. That helps too with shortening a little bit, like Dick Westheimer suggests. And it is nice. I think I agree with that too. Some of the lines get a little long. Hope was perched on one of the shabby couches, exclaiming to everyone that she was glad that she, with her slender frame, her beaky nose, her squint, was going to fly free of this short-term facility. And so this is a really great use of the callback line to this line. It's a really nice this one. It's a really nice repetition there. She was going to fly the short-term facility, exclaiming to everyone that she was glad that her caseworkers and nurses and shrink had finally said she was going to fly free of this short-term facility where her short-term stay had been getting longer. And so here, like somewhere around here, I would have liked to see, though, a little bit more of the backstory. And I think, once you sort of establish where she is, we get a great visual of Hope, perched as she is on the couch, and then turn back a little bit to who she is and what the connection is. And I think that would make it resonate with us a little bit more, just seeing that where the relationship sits. How do you know Hope, basically, is what is the question that I'm really wanting to know. And I don't think it's ever really answered here. And I mean, it could just be answered with one line. It doesn't have to be a long explanation, but it's sort of a missing connection that we don't get. Anyway, where was I? Her caseworkers and nurses and shrink had finally said she'd be transferred to Creedmoor. My Scrabble tile spelled warehouse. As her short-term stay had been getting longer, no one had been able to or wanted to take her in. She'd squared away at Creedmoor. The AIDS tile spelled woeful. Even here, people had little patience to offer hope. No one had been able to or wanted to take her in. And so some of the times, the trick with the pantoum is to make the repetitions each feel like they're adding something. I shouldn't maybe say the trick, the difficulty. It's the really hard thing to do. It's what makes it a hard form. And in this section, to me, and I think it's kind of a perfect fit, because we were saying I want some more backstory and to know what the relationship is with Hope, so we just get a little bit more of an emotional connection to the story. And here, these repetitions feel a little redundant, whereas in the past, the repetitions hadn't yet for the first few stanzas to me. And so I think there's a real opportunity to somehow fit in a little bit of backstory in these couple stanzas here. Because no one had been able to or wanted to take her in. Repeating that, it doesn't have, nothing changes. It's just like a repetition of that. Anyway, even here, people had little patience to offer hope, badly as it was needed. We weren't sure we could trust it. Our little circles of friends and allies and frenemies, to our little circle of friends and allies and frenemies, hope could seem a little alien, a little obnoxious. And again, I think I would like to see this demonstrated a little bit. Like there's opportunities in the poem to share a little backstory and to do more of that description where she was perched on the couch. Like, how is she obnoxious? I would really love to hear a little bit about that in the next stanza. And we don't. We sort of repeat again, or at least in an abstract way. So they said that Hope's whining never stopped at all. Like, whining is an abstraction too. It's like a generalization of what she's doing. Like give us an actual, what is she whining about, I think, would make that part stronger. Hope could seem a little alien, a little obnoxious. They used to call her hopeless, but I realized that though they said Hope's whining never stopped at all, she sought hope and a home even at Creedmoor. And I think, this seeking a home even at Creedmoor is a really, really strong line that almost slips by us. The effort to make a home even there is something that's really moving, actually. They used to call her hopeless, but decades later, when I'm discouraged, I still find myself remembering. And here, this is that turn that we were mentioning. And we move forward decades later, looking back on it. And the surprise, when I'm discouraged, I still find myself remembering how she sought hope and a home even at Creedmoor. So really nice to highlight that. In this case, this is a good case of it, the repetition not feeling redundant, but driving the point home. So I think that works. With my Scrabble tiles, I spelled example. When I'm discouraged, I still find myself remembering how hope might cling, might make its home on the starkest perch. And I really like the ending too. Yeah. Yeah, Tamara says might drop in a sentence in her voice to break it up. Yeah, that's what I meant with the whining. Like, I'd like to actually hear some of the whining. So I think there's just a little bit, like those two little things are missing from the poem that really make it connect in a deeper way, which is a little bit of backstory. Like, was she an old friend? How did she get there? Some kind of hint at that at least, or and then a little bit of detail about her personality that makes people, that make her seem obnoxious, like a specific detail. Brian Sullivan says, so as a patient, just a bad depression way back in my 20s, so working in that backstory might take a lot of focus off hope. Yeah, I think we need to know, you can do that in like one sentence, or even a phrase. just to say that you were there too for depression. And then, I think that, I think that would work. So just make us feel that connection a little more. And then a little more, like we said, a little bit more of a, Kimberly Gibson Trent says, that's interesting. I think you should work that in just a little bit at the beginning. Yeah, I completely agree. I just think it's, Okay. But I do like the Starkest Perch. I really like the ending. So I think overall I really like this poem. Just a little bit more detail would help. Let's see. And what about, does anybody have any thoughts about the title? I mean, the line from Emily Dickinson, it's one of the most famous lines in poetry, of course. What does it add to use that as the title? Like the throwback to Emily Dickinson. Is that something that feels like it should be a resonant thing that adds to the poem? I'm not sure that it does, actually. I mean, I don't know. What's everybody's thoughts on that? Because I kind of, to me, it doesn't like change it or comment on it enough to pull it up. And it might be stronger just without the reference. And maybe you could work in, like we often do, work in the backstory a little in the title, and then we don't have to try to fit the backstory in as much. Let's see. Dry Montito says, replying to Tom, I didn't see what Tom said, but I think it's an idea that would help with enlivening the repetitions. Let me see what Tom said. I gotta find it though. Referring to Tom Barlow saying it might drop in a sentence in her voice to break up the pattern. Yeah. And then Dry Montito says, I think that's an idea that would help with enlivening the repetitions. If a line of dialogue were spoken by one character and re-spoken by another, that will assign new meaning to the same words. Yeah, exactly. That's a great point. And Jamie Thomas agrees. I don't think the title is helping. Tom Barlow says the title's a little punny. Yeah, I just don't think that adds enough. I think it might not be worth it. David Booth suggests the Dickinson poem also includes the line that it never asked a crumb of me. Could that work in? And this thing, if you're going to use the without feathers, it's just such a common, quotation that unless you're commenting on it, you're reversing it, or you're adding more in like that, where there are more references to the poem throughout, and it becomes a little bit of a scavenger hunt to find the references. That could add something. But as it stands, I don't think it does. So I think we'd be better off with a title that helps set the scene and set the stage a little bit more. And Dick Westheimer says this could be one of those poems with a long title, like Living with Hope and Depression in blank residential mental health hospital. Yeah, exactly, yeah. And Sandra Fee suggests something with Scrabble in the title might be interesting. Yeah. Yeah. All right, yeah, so everybody, I think, agrees with the title. Yeah, okay, so I think that's a good useful critique of that. So hopefully that's helpful, Brian. But yeah, great use of the form. And really the turn at the end, that turn to the future, I think works really well and a great ending. Let's see what the other poem is, and I'll go back and look at what Brian said about that one. So with Ars Poetica, I'm wondering whether I'm overusing whatever license comes with writing intentional doggerel. And again, I'll be very happy to get any feedback you want to give. By the way, I think I first came up with this Ars in the E title to suggest it to someone whose poem was being critiqued here. That's funny. Okay. So this is the second poem Brian's got, and this is Ars Poetica. Here we go. Ars Poetica. For I will consider my cat, Joffrey, Christopher Smart, and Jubilette Agnew. I'm not sure what that is, but here's the poem. Ars Poetica. For shall I sing with my dear dog, Gerald, and how he merrily, boldly romps through every contretemps, and how he rolls off logs into bogs of mischief? Am I pronouncing that right? Because it's kind of important. For I shall consider my dog Gerald to be laughter's good, loyal herald, and my fool companion in grief. For my dog Gerald and I shall harrow hell, for he breaketh such sweet wind, as maketh every devil run giggling upwind. Thus I shall sing my doggerel. Well, that's a funny turn in the poem. It's one of those things it's hard to write humor into poetry on the page, and it's also and it's rare. And so it's kind of fun to do. And we don't see many submissions like this. It's fun to do. There's also very few, but some journals like Light that publish poems focused on humor. So yeah, this is a lot of fun. So how could we make it better? Yeah. Ars Poetica. For I shall sing my dear dog, Gerald, and how he merrily, boldly romps through every countertempts, and how he rolls off logs into bogs of mischief. I love bogs of mischief. That's a great line. For I shall consider my dog Gerald to be laughter's good, loyal herald, and my fool companion in grief. For my dog Gerald and I harrow hell, for he breaketh such sweet wind, he is maketh every devil run giggling upwind. Thus I shall sing my doggerel. Yeah, so I wonder if it could, I think it feels a little rushed, actually. I wonder if it could be a few more stanzas. We get to see the dog a little more. And I think, there's some slant rhymes. Dry Montito saying this fun poem. I don't know if rhyming wind with wind takes some of the jolt out of it, coming so near the punchline. Yeah, I think with a doggerel type poem in comedy, it's really nice just to have true rhymes. And I love slant rhyme, especially in more serious formal poetry. I prefer it to true rhyme. But when it's sort of this form, this structure, where you're being playful, it feels nice to actually have true rhymes. And so I would suggest changing those. The grief and mischief, the Gerald and Harold is kind of nice. Although you get the problem with the dog's name. I don't think everybody knows exactly how to pronounce it. And we've talked about this before too. But if there's a word that you can sort of sound out phonetically, it's sort of easier to fly by it and just like say the word and don't worry about it. But if it's hard to figure out how to pronounce it, it really trips the poem up a little bit, and just your voice in your head. There's really no way around that. It's an unfortunate fact. So I'd maybe consider changing the dog's name, or maybe changing the spelling so it's more phonetic, so it's easier to see how it's pronounced. Yeah. Let's see. Jamie Thomas, is there a reason the dog's name is spelled differently, or is that just a typo? Differently? Oh, yeah, there's 2 R's. I didn't notice that. There's 2 R's in this Gerald and 1 in these 2. Rachel Grief says the epigraph. It's fun, but I'm not sure the cat reference in a dog poem. For I will consider my cat, Joffrey. Yeah. Mary Keating. So I don't understand the epigraph either. I'm not familiar with Christopher Smart or that. Let me Google and see what comes up. Is it a poem that this is after? Is someone suggested? Ah, okay. Yeah, that is a line. It's from an actual Christopher Smart poem. For I will consider my cat Joffrey, for he is a servant of the living God, duly. And I'm sorry, we gotta shrink this a little bit to fit. Yeah, it's too long to read, but we get the idea here. For English cats are the best in Europe. That kind of thing. It's a praise poem. I assume kind of funny. For interestingly, there's no source listed. Oh, it's from there. It is. Sorry, cat poems in 2017. Okay. Anyway, that's courtesy of the Poetry Foundation, of course. All right. Well, anyway, so that's sort of a reference to that. Let me zoom in again. Okay. Let's see. Are there any other comments? Jamie Thomas says, I generally think this would read better if it broke from Smart's sentence structure. That's a good point. Let me read it one more time. It's Ars Poetica. For I shall sing my dear dog. I'm not sure why dog is capitalized either, by the way. My dear dog Gerald, and how he merrily, boldly romps through every contretempts, and how he rolls off logs into bogs of mischief. For I shall consider my dog Gerald. I think the repetition of this, and I guess that's what it is, and I think that's what Jamie was referring to, is that Jubilant Agno repeats for my cat, and so we have for my dog. For I will consider my, so that's a repetition. I think the poem is, I wouldn't stick with this. Maybe as a start, but then not repeat it. because it doesn't really add a whole lot, and it does make the it does make the sounds of it a little repetitive. For I shall consider my dog Gerald, because you only have 12 lines in this poem, and 2 of them are sort of throwaways because they just repeat this throwback to Christopher Smart, and I think that in a short poem it doesn't really add enough to justify being there. So anyway, where were we? For I shall consider my dog Gerald to be laughter's good, loyal herald, and my fool companion in grief. For my dog Gerald and I shall harrow in hell, for he breaketh such sweet wind. See, I do feel, to me, it feels like it's missing a couple stanzas. I think we could go a little bit longer here and make it like maybe 5 stanzas and show a little bit more storytelling before we get to the punchline. Yeah. Yeah. And as Mary Keating says, the first stanza is great. I think the first and last stanzas are great. I think we need 3 in the middle that show a little bit more of, we get to know the dog a little bit more. I think that would make it fun. And like I said, the playfulness of the doggerel, I find that enjoyable. You have to find the right magazine to publish it, but I think there's a lot of fun in there. Yeah. Oh, so this is something we didn't notice. So Brian says, interesting. What I was trying to do was make dog Gerald look a little more like doggerel each time, but the double R was a typo. Okay. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. Yeah, well, I did not notice that, but that's funny. So that's a fun Easter egg. So maybe I said repeating these lines because it's such a short poem feels too redundant. But if we had, I think we want 2 more stanzas where we see the dog a little more, and so do that a little more until we get to the very end where it's that close. Okay. Rachel Grief says this, and I've had this thought too. If there's going to be an eth ending, the breaketh, we'd like to see it show up throughout and not just one verse. Yeah, I agree too. Yeah. Emmy Arnold Fernandez says, what if instead of my dog Gerald, you just called him Dog Gerald every time you use the name? That's cool too, yeah. Okay, anyway, that's a fun poem. Thanks for sharing that, Brian. I like the style. I think it just could use more context and a little more story. Yeah. All right, so that's it. So thanks, Brian, for sharing those. Hope the critique was helpful as always. Brian O'Sullivan from California, Maryland. Now we will go to another poet. Let me mark this. Oh, I forgot to email the poets from last week again. I keep doing that. All right. Well, anyway. And now we're going to go to the oldest poems in the queue. And the oldest poem here is this one. It's from November 13th. Maren McLaughlin from Ontario, Canada. No questions, just the poem pasted into the body of the submission. So here we go. The first one, these are both short poems. A doctor's guide to relieving the itch. Itch the itch. Itch the scratch. Scratch the scratch. Scratch the itch. Repeat the itch. The scratch. The itch. So I think it's a clever... So that's, similar. We can look back at Brian's poem. And we had, Brian started with that pun, the Ars Poetica, and then where he was going, and it was sort of a one thing. Then he added a few other things. The dog, the contretemps, and the mischief. And I think here it's a tiny poem, similar kind of, the brief having fun with words and representing things, but it just ends up being one note. And really, one note's not enough for a song. And so I think more has to happen is all with this. It's like a great idea, great start of the poem. The wordplay's fun, but I think we need more. And even if it's a short poem, like more play within the poem, because we kind of get what's going on. Itch the itch, itch the scratch, scratch the scratch. That sets up an expectation, and then the 2 lines just sort of repeat, no pun intended, but they repeat the same thought. And I think that's just not enough to carry a poem. We need more. We need some kind of turn, some kind of twist. Mary Keene says scratch the scratch could be the end, which is scratch meaning forget in the first case. Oh, that's funny. Yeah, just scratch the scratch. So if you're going to have a short poem, like go all the way. Like make it 3 lines. That's a good suggestion. But we need some more movement, more something else added to the poem. Some surprise at the end, maybe, as Sharon Fronte says. Yeah. So it's an interesting thought. Played a little bit, but not played enough. Let's read the second poem. Ali Rowland says, doctors sometimes tell you to scratch somewhere else to fool your brain into thinking you've dealt with it. Well, that's interesting. I never heard that, and maybe that advice will help somebody out there or myself someday. Okay. The next one is called Burning. I loathe the past till the act can't be undone. Hear me then and hear me now. Hold no mercy close to the heart. Use me as your match and set this brain ablaze. Burn it down, 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 down to the ground. So again, it's just the same kind of comment as last time. It's an interesting start to the poem, but then it doesn't do anything more. And and really we need more substance. The poem is just a way of storytelling. It's a way of telling stories through the music of speech, in a way that's memorable outside of the page. And this doesn't tell enough of the story. I loathe the past till the act can't be undone. Hear me then and hear me now. So the first line's fine. I loathe the past till the act can't be undone. If we go into some of the past, we see some acts, we know who you are, we know what we're talking about. But instead we just say, hear me then and hear me now, which doesn't add anything. Hold no mercy close to the heart. That's an interesting line if it's a line within other contexts and other concrete details. But it doesn't. It just comes in this sort of nebulous realm that we're living in. Use me as your match and set this brain ablaze. Like, who are you and what's the brain? Again, that's an abstraction that has nothing grounding it. Burn it down. So it's just sort of, yeah. Doug Van Hoser says first line works, but then it all goes flats. Yeah. And so just tell us your story. It's really not, it shouldn't be hard to just tell the story you need to tell. And we all have stories we need to tell. That's what poetry is really about. And the readers are here to listen. We want to hear the stories that you need to tell. So tell the story, and we'll leave it at that. But just, I'll loathe the past till the act can't be undone. Then tell us the act or an example of something you're talking about. And then when you get to that great line, because it really hold no mercy close to the heart, that's nice. But if there was some kind of context, so tell the story, tell some examples, give concrete details, build a place that we're in. And yeah, Sharon French says, what act? Yeah, tell us that. Okay, we're going to move on to the next poem. Thanks for sharing that, Doe. Hope that was helpful. Again, that was Maren McLaughlin from Canada. Next, let's see who's next. This one is from Gora from India. Oh, finally, submittable added. So for years, I've been complaining that you have to look at second place just to find the country. And it looks like submittable added in the regular info, the country. It just really helps when you're logging in, like entering people's addresses after you publish their poem and stuff, if you can see the country without going to a totally separate place. Anyway, Gora is from India. And again, this is oh, wait, no, we have a document too. No questions. And this one is called Sky High Delight. So let's take a look. Sky High Delight. Beautifully dressed children run ahead with enthusiasm. Strings of their kites hurts, but hold them tight. Run, children, run, for that kite to fly with sun-kissed shine. Hopes are of bright. These children fly like kites. Imagine their light-headed delight. Two kites above are fighting, hopping for highest sky. One child's kite roar alone seems to be the winner. Slowly all other kites came down. The owner of the winning kite proud, but suddenly a kite looking down, worn down, remains too. It was hiding meekly in the corner and promised to be a loner. So this poem, it goes on a bit. It feels like English might not be the first language, and it was loosely translated from another language. Some nice phrases could have come out accidentally. Sun-kissed shine, Kimberly Gibson Tran suggests. But this is, I think I'm going to start just moving quickly through the ones that seem like this, because we do get a lot of submissions where people don't even realize they're submitting to the critique of the week, to be honest. And I think if you don't have any questions and it just seems like a poem that might be translated from another language, there are a lot of people that just see somehow like get money for poems and just randomly send us stuff that kind of feels like maybe that's what this is. So I'm going to move on. I'll do that more often. We'll move on more quickly with those, because we spend a lot of time talking about this stuff, and I think I have a suspicion some of these people don't actually like look later. Okay, so there's that. And if if this was a genuine submission, watch the critique of the week more often than keep writing. Okay, this one is Natasha Davies from Great Britain somewhere, and yeah. Winston Munn says, I always admire someone who tries to write in a second language. Yeah, it's very nice. I couldn't do it. But, okay, so this is no questions. Really, if there's no questions, I kind of wonder about the honesty of the submission, or if we're really looking for a critique. But let's see what we got. Let's zoom in a little bit. Okay. No title here. The title was Everything. Hang on. The title was Everything. The Everything Parade. Okay. The Everything Parade. I don't know why it's almost so small. Okay. There we go. The problem with romanticizing your life is the gravity, that unseen hand yanking your world down, all the bits you strung up with little pegs, decorations that twinkle with cheap glitter, sequins, pom-poms, your everything parade. You thought they would cling on a little longer, with all the goddamn superglue you used, your shitty job dressed up in tinsel, your average boyfriend inflated airborne, your hometown a quiet slice of heaven you baked. But it melts, thaws, collapses to the shape and size it always was. Heavy, hard-edged mediocrity, lumps of skin and bone hanging from you like bricks, empty kilos. Do other people feel this way? Do they cradle their carnivals, draping their bruises and bunting, counting balloons like blessings, never wishing it to be were different? Or do they sense it too, the crack in the ground, the pull of a chasm to somewhere weightless and wild, a tectonic revelation that would shatter the paperweights for good? So nice, really, if you notice how easy that poem was to read, there's really nice rhythm. The line breaks work really well to help the reading, and there's a lot of good detail, a lot of concrete images and things here. Yeah. Maria Alberg says, just about what I said. Good to know, Tim. I thought no questions would get a more open critique. Yeah, well, it's fine to any questions. I shouldn't have said it like that. But when the poem, so we get a lot of submissions. The truth is that I think they don't even have any idea what they're submitting for. And I think that happens with critique of the week too. And you can kind of just sense it based on the fact that, the syntax is so broken, and there's no comments. It's not anybody who are used to submitting. And there's just a sense. And then I feel like we're spending like 5 or 10 minutes on a poem there are people that don't know what they're submitting for that submit. I don't know why. There's things that are for the Ekphrastic Challenge that have nothing to do with what we're talking about. And there's things for Poets Respond all the time that are just like that. I don't know, but I think we get that in Critique of the Week too. And I think we're just going to skip those poems. And if it's a mistake, they can let me know later, and we'll look at it more closely. But I don't think we should not waste our time with that, which is something after 5 years I'm finally admitting. Okay, well, let's look at this poem again more closely. And again, this was on The Everything Parade, which is a fun title too. The problem with romanticizing your life is the gravity, that unseen hand yanking your world down, all the bits you strung up with little pegs, decorations that twinkle like cheap glitter, sequins, pom-poms, your everything parade. So very nice, and the great sense of detail here, and and calling that your everything parade. I think that's really neat. You thought they would cling on a little longer with all the goddamn superglue you used. The goddamn feels a little out of place and register to me. And then cling on a little longer feels a little awkward. So I think we had a nice the voice was sort of finding itself pretty quickly in the first stanza. We get a little choppy here, and I think you thought they would cling on a little longer, and all the goddamn super glue you used. It doesn't feel as smooth and natural as most of the poem. And I think maybe there's just a better way to phrase that. Desi Cochran says, I love the images. I'm undecided how I feel about gravity versus melting. Mixed metaphor. Yeah. Community Gibson Tran says, just damn super glue would be fine. Yeah. And I think, just you thought they would cling longer, like cling on a little longer, like that's just cluttery, and it doesn't match the smoothness of the rest of the speech. Your shitty job, dressed up in tinsel, your boyfriend, average boyfriend, inflated, airborne. I like that inflated. I'm not sure airborne, but I guess it calls back to the tinsel. It's kind of fun. Your hometown, a quiet slice of heaven you baked. Quiet slice of heaven seems a bit of a cliche. So maybe something more interesting there. And I'm being picky about the certain details because there's parts where they don't live up to how good the rest of the details are. Because it's really nice details throughout. It melts, thaws, collapses. But it melts, thaws, collapses to the shape and size it always was. Heavy, hard-edged mediocrity, lumps of skin and bone hanging from you like bricks, empty kilos. For your average boyfriend, inflated, is funny. This is Lisa Seidenberg says, and that stanza there. Yeah, I like that too. So the it here, it's a little hard to follow for me what the it is throughout. And the it is your life, right? So your whole life. So when it says, but it melts, thaws, collapses to the shape and size it always was, that it is your life. Your life melts and thaws. I think that's a little distant. I think reestablishing that, if I'm reading it right. So saying, but your life melts, thaws, collapses to the shape and size it always was, because we do get a little bit lost in what that's referring to. Dry Montito says slice of heaven is a cliche, but literalizing it by imagining actually baking and slicing heaven is not cliche. And yeah, I think that's true, but I think it's not vivid enough to pull that off, is kind of what I meant. Emily Arnold Fernandez says, it seems like it should be gravity. So here we're getting lost in, so gravity melts? So I guess we're getting, yeah, maybe it's even ambiguous and I didn't interpret it right. Let's see, Ryan McCarty says, I don't know that I love the third stanza either, but I really appreciate that it was making a really clear break, doing something different. Yeah, I like that too. I think it's just that it's unclear what we're referring to, and that makes it makes something that's really concrete and memorable become a little bit amorphous and confusing. So reestablish what the it is. Whether it's gravity, I think it's your life, but we have some confusion there. Heavy, hard-edged mediocrity, lumps of skin and bone hanging from you like bricks, empty kilos. I don't know if you need the empty kilos. Do other people feel this way? Do they cradle their carnivals, draping their bruises and bunting, counting balloons like blessings, never wishing it were different? I think that's a really nice stanza too. And notice how when we have this rhythm working really well, you get a nice clean stanza too. Or do they sense it too? The crack in the ground, the pull of a chasm to somewhere, weightless and wild, a tectonic revelation that would shatter the paperweights for good. Oh, so Emily says yes. So she meant it. I guess syntactically should be referring to gravity. Ryan McCarty says, is there ever something to be said for the ambiguous it sometimes, though? Like you're waving your arms at everything. Yeah, I mean, you could use it right, but when you lose the thread of the poem, when you lose that like touchstone where you're a little bit lost, I think that takes so much away that it's not worth doing. There's times you could do that. I don't know if I could think off the top of my head of an example of a poem that does use ambiguity in that way, but it's definitely possible. But that doesn't mean it's like good advice. And the title again was The Everything Parades. Wayne the Poet asked. And somebody said, Mary Keating says the ending needs to be stronger. And two, it's like a great setup. There's a lot of images and it's interesting. And then the ending to me doesn't quite put it there. Do other people feel this way? I think it's a nice turn there. But then it sort of leaves the wheels spinning after that. Do they cradle their carnivals? So it's nice phrase. Draping their bruises and bunting, counting balloons like blessings, never wishing it were different. And then maybe instead of or, maybe like a no, they do this and blah, blah, blah. And then make that more of a statement. And that would be a more satisfying ending. Nancy Snell says, I love all the descriptive language, but would like it to have a bit more breathing room to let you in, or whatever. Okay. So, yeah, or do they sense it too? Yeah, and the it in the last stanza is something different than, as somebody pointed out. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, to me, I think what I think we could do I think the stanza is nice. It's just the closing stanza doesn't have like, doesn't leave us with the feeling that we've gone on this journey with a sense of purpose, that there was a reason to it. And I think we could change it. Do they feel this way? Do they blah, blah, blah? No, they do this, or maybe they do this, or there's some kind of statement there that's a little more than a question. I think one of the things Katie Dozier doesn't like poems that end in questions. And I think this is a good example of why. It's like the poet, a lot of times when you don't know how to end a poem, you end up just asking a question, sort of letting it hang there. Like that, the mystery of the thing you're proposing is enough to be like a stand in for the ending that could be there. And I think it's just much better to say something in most cases. So, Kimberly Gibson Tran says, I sense the end is trying to reach for something cosmic. Yeah, but it's like reaching sort of vaguely out there instead of really going for it. And I think there, go for it and the poem would work, I think. And Wayne the Poet says, it is a word I've made an effort to replace more and more over the years. Yeah. Yeah, and Winston Munn says it's kind of like ending on a perhaps. Yeah, it is. It's just not, it doesn't have the qualities that we take something away from it. Yeah. Anyway, so that's the Everything Parade. I think it was the only poem submitted. Thanks for sharing that. That was Natasha Davies from Northwich in the UK. Okay. Next up, we'll do one more, I think. Maybe two, depending on how much time. And the next one is Vaishnava Pasupati from Bangalore. Okay. Title is Don't Be Silent in the Face of Ethnic Cleansing. So that's a title that lets you know what it's about for sure. Again, pasted in the body of the poem. And so this looks like a Poets Respond type poem. So let's talk about that a little bit too, in addition to I'm looking at it. So, and I guess the title is maybe Don't Be Silent. And I don't know why is... Gotta get it bigger. There we go. Don't be silent. Sudan is not a fictional place. It is as real as a warm sweater on a winter day. Can you find Khartoum and Darfur on the map? There is an invisible and severe existential battle, the civil war that has turned a country into a graveyard. It has been 2 years and things only escalate. I wear hope as if it were an impenetrable armor. I wear it like a summer dress in spring with pockets. Its wear and tear shows it was useful. It was loved. As the war stretches like a long drought, my words become my weapons, my wreath for the remembrance that lives were stolen. While we watched, while we were silent, so many identical dates have passed. Sometimes I dream of the dead, haunting, lurking, reaching out. I have no use for hope anymore, no more than an umbrella under cloudless skies. The dead whisper, don't be silent. So I ask the question, how will the world help stop the war in Sudan? Don't be silent. So I think this is a good example of a Poets Respond poem, a poem written after the news about things that are going on, topical poetry. And I think for the most part, the the approach, I think, is working really well. I think that's the kind of way, there's a drive to write about this. There's a goal for the poem, which is don't be silent. Like, think about this. But then it doesn't just stay there, even though it ends up in the same place. And I think that's a problem. But for the most part, throughout the poem, it's interrogating that and digging deeper into that thought. Now, the main thing is what Jesse A is pointing out. Jesse A says, I'm not sure the metaphors are really working for me. And there's a real disconnect with what those metaphors are doing and what and what would really connect within the poem. And so we start out, Sudan is not a fictional place. Someone said that's a nice, and I think Don't Be Silent is an okay title if we didn't repeat it at the end. But Sudan is not a fictional place. I think it's a good starting. It's a very strong, confident statement, which helps you feel engaged with the poem. So I think it's good. I would like to see, you could make this poem and riff on that a little bit. It's not a fictional place. It's not where this happens. It's not where this happens. It's not like this. You could push that a little farther. Instead, we didn't utilize that, but it was a nice line, and it's an opportunity, I think, to go more in that direction of describing what a fictional place would be like and why it's not that fictional place. But then talking about the metaphor here, it is as real as a warm sweater on a winter day. And that feels, that's not something that's especially, real as we're talking about, but it's also something that doesn't really fit with the themes of the poem. Like a warm sweater on a winter day, if we could have something that related to what was going on in Khartoum and Darfur, use those as metaphors, have them pull out something unique that's from this setting. Like we kind of, if we're building this place, we have like the set, like a stage in a play that we're building through describing things. And you want to use the things that are on the set to enact what you're trying to describe and relate. And, there's not really like a sweater on this scene. And so it feels out of place. So use things that relate to the content that you're talking about. Let's see. Yeah, Kimberly Gibson Duran puts it this way: I wish this poem made Sudan more real for me. And that's really like why I'm saying that. If we drew metaphors from things in Sudan, then we would get to feel it more, feel like we were actually there. And that's like the whole point. And so going to the warm sweater ruins even the attempt at feeling like we're there. So anyway, that's the first thing. And there are a few other metaphors like this too. I wear it like a summer dress in spring with pockets. It just doesn't feel like it fits the content either. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So let's keep reading. Can you find Khartoum and Darfur on the map? I think one of the problems, it doesn't, Sudan is not a fictional place. We don't capitalize on that. By talking about like what a fictional place would look like we were saying before, or what it's not, like what else it's not. But then the same thing happens here. Can you find Darfur, Khartoum and Darfur on a map? Because you just leave that hanging there instead of taking the opportunity to describe the map or something else to go deeper into that thought. We just move on to there's an invisible and severe existential battle, which I assume is a quote from a newspaper, and that the change in diction kind of works. That remove that you have in journalism from the actual thing that's going on, that sort of emotional distance where you see invisible and severe existential battle is not something you'd normally say. And so I think that's nice in quotes. But there's like these gaps that we're sort of leaping across and not filling in. And the filling in is what would make us feel more connected to the content. A civil war that has turned a country into a graveyard. It has been 2 years and things only escalate. And again, so everywhere we have this thing where we make a statement and then we don't elaborate on it in a way that's vivid and brings us there. So it's been 2 years and things only escalate. And then describe something. Like, what does it look like when things have only escalated? Like, what has, like, this town square turned into, or whatever it is. Like describe the scene a little bit. There's a real opportunity there, and we just move on to the next thought. I wear hope as if it were an impenetrable armor. And so that's we could talk about, In that instance, we could talk about using that hope, that armor, as more of a metaphor and describe the armor more. And what does the armor look like? And how does that relate? You could develop that more. I wear it like a summer dress in spring with pockets. Again, I think that's off in the same way the sweater is. It just doesn't feel like it fits the content of the poem. Its wear and tear shows it was useful. It was loved. Show us the actual. The metaphor is saying that. It's like a summer dress with wear and tear that shows it was useful. Like, what would it actually look like? What do the people do? That kind of thing. Let's see. As the war stretches like a long drought, my words become my weapons. I think and don't know exactly, but I think drought is part of the crisis in Sudan, and so that is a metaphor. As the war stretches on like a long drought, that fits the topic. But then go into detail about where the drought could be or what river, adding more. Sorry, I should have muted. Adding more would really help. As the war stretches like a long drought, my words become my weapons, my wreath for the remembrance that lives were stolen while we watched, while we were silent. And so what was it like? Like, describe watching and being silent. Like, actually describe it. We're have this like vague distance, and that's why the poem's not really connecting. So it's just detail, concrete images. We need that stuff to really engage with the content, even though we feel the emotion behind this one, and it's an important topic that we care about hearing more about. We want to feel like we're there. We want to feel like Sudan's not a fictional place, like Kimberly Gibson Tran said. Kimberly Gibson Tran says, I'm a bit interested in the speakers reaching for clothing details. What do people in Sudan wear? I wonder. I don't even know what the climate is like. Yeah, I believe it's pretty hot and relatively dry. I think it has a lot of seasonal variation. Let's see. Yeah. And Patty Arbor says it takes courage to address difficult, large issues from a personal viewpoint, but I feel that the poet could do more. Do this. There's some passion here. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and Rachel Grief says describe where those places are on the map and then zoom in. Yeah, we just need more detail. The heart is here and the important subject matter is here, but detail. It's just so important to have detail. So many identical dates have passed. Sometimes I dream of the dead, haunting, lurking, reaching out. Like who specifically? Like, describe it. Just, what does their hand look like reaching out? Like, give us some of those details, and then we'll connect more. Like, because it's a dream, so you can describe more than the general description there. I have no use for hope anymore, no more than an umbrella under cloudless skies. The dead whisper, don't be silent. So I ask the question, how will the world stop? The war in Sudan, don't be silent. So we repeat the title, and we get back to, we are trying, with all these statements, we're trying to dig deeper into how we feel about the situation, which is what really connects. It's what we want to do. But then we go back and turn at the end to the political message that we want, and that preconceived thing. I want to write a poem that says, don't be silent. And that's not really where art and creativity is generated. It's not by that preconceived construct that you have that you want to share. That's why it's so hard to write political poems, because we have these political ideologies that we want to put forth, and there's not that creative exploration where we learn something new. And if we just ended, I think a much better ending for this poem would be just the dead whisper, don't be silent. But then going back to this, the rhetoric of that, I think kills what the poem had. Okay. So there's that. So that's, I didn't read the note. My poem is about the ongoing war in Sudan reaching its 2-year mark. I was disappointed that Russia vetoed the UN Security Council action on the Sudan war. In the face of ethnic cleansing, action from the UN was most dire, and the fact that people in Sudan seem to have so little value has shattered many hopes about seeing an end to the civil war. This veto should cause outrage, but the Sudan war has shown how little a life from Africa is valued. This is an act of omission, choosing not to act, and the silence of the world to one of the most extreme humanitarian crises in the present is unreal. Okay, so that's that. And thanks for sharing that. Hope this critique was helpful. Details. Add the details. Well, Let's see. We'll do one. Well, if it's a short one, we'll do one more. We have two. Okay, we have two. This is Joanna Hope Britcher from Todmorden, Canada. No, where? I lied when I said they put the thing back. She just wrote it. From Great Britain. Yorkshire. Okay. So 2 poems here. Were there questions? Sorry, hang on. I click into. Yep, no questions. Okay. Let's take a look at these 2 poems. 3? I only see 2. That's good. 3, from January or bog snorkeling. Okay, well, let's see what we got. 3, from January or bog snorkeling. Well, that's an interesting title. I'm not sure what it means, but maybe we'll find out. I'm all south-facing at the limits of our known common land, and when we walk in shards of fiberglass. Let me be further off the scale, I said, after I'd seen the inside of that shed, the pleasure dome, rough-cut wood, shelving of elves. And when we moved in, all this was drugs, more than before. What a way to start a year, and the rain ever pelting our naked necks. You said, I'll stop in summer. I reckon can hold my breath that long. 3, from January or bog snorkeling. Well, bog snorkeling is a great title. It makes me very curious, and I'm not sure if we ever figured out what that meant or what the title itself means. 3, from January or bog snorkeling. Yeah, so I'm all south-facing at the limits of our known common land. And that's italicized like it's a quote from something, but I'm not sure what. And when we walk in shards of fiberglass. Well, it's an interesting image if we sort of can figure out what it means. Let me be farther off the scale, I said, after I'd seen the inside of that shed. So what shed? The pleasure dome. Rough-cut wood, shelving of elves. So I'm just completely lost in this poem. At least in the first 2 stanzas. And when we move, all this was drugs more than ever before. What a way to start a year. The rain ever pelting our naked necks. Yeah. Emily Arnold Fernandez says, I love the line, the rain ever pelting our naked necks, conveys that horrible feeling of cold water on the back of the neck. Yeah, it does. I think that's the best line in the poem. And the rain ever pelting our naked necks, you said, I'll stop in summer. I reckon can hold my breath that long. I think I'm missing an I, maybe. I reckon I can hold my breath that long. Yeah. Kimberly Gibson Tran says, I'm all south-facing is a fun opening, but I don't love the second line, too cryptic. I think the whole poem is too cryptic. Bog snorkeling. This is from Jimmy Pappas. I was going to look it up, so thanks for helping me not have to. Bog snorkeling is a sporting event where competitors aim to compete 2 consecutive lengths of a 60-yard water-filled trench cut through a peat bog in the shortest time possible. Okay. Well, that's interesting. So I think definitely bog snorkeling is the title, so we know where we are. Yeah, because if you see a title like that, it's interesting. I hope I'm going to learn the poem, but if not, I'm going to Google it because we're living in the 21st century. And so we can find that out. And so that becomes interesting. But how does that fit? Now that we know that that's what bog snorkeling is, it's a sporting event where competitors aim to complete 2 consecutive lengths of water-filled trench cut through peat bog in the shortest time possible. Okay. I'm all south-facing at the limits of our known common land. I still don't know what that means. When we walk in shards of fiberglass. Let me be further off the scale, I said after I'd seen the inside of that shed. So what shed? I don't understand. I don't understand what this stuff is. That pleasure dome, rough-cut wood, shelving. And when we moved in, all this was drugs, more than ever before. What a way to start a year. And the rain ever pelting it. It just doesn't let us into the story. I'd love to know what's going on here. I just have no idea. And because I have no idea, I don't care. And because I don't care, the poem doesn't connect. And it's just, we need to be let in the story. We need, there's some nice details here, but we don't know what to connect them to. So they just kind of hover around like shapes in a void. And, we want to hear the story. So don't hold back the story. What you want to be ambiguous or held back and letting us participate in is the leap of meaning that you're making by sharing the story, not the details of the story itself. And it feels like you're talking about something that's really deeply, has a lot of meaning, but the meaning isn't being shared. And so we just feel left out of the poem, even though there's some nice lines. So tell the story. You can tell it in the title. That's an easier way to do it. You can just tell it straightforward, but we want to know. Let's look at the other one really quickly. See if it's got the same problem. To be loved, not saved. Willow feathers whisper what? The business at the root is so obvious, it doesn't need to be said. Tracks in ragged duckweed where they pass, and the stilt-legged heron stalks beyond the tangled island sanctuary. Sun through ever-shifting slivers of willow green and gold, green and silver, and our feet, the rotting things, rot, collapse into silt, all things becoming one thing. Sorry, hang on. I think I get allergies this time of year. Very, very, everything blooming right now. Like a new life never ceases springing up. Harmony, argument of all things living, each leaning upon the other. It is not a question of relying on one plant. It is a door that opens when we are in conversation. If you are doing these things, forest, brackish, lagoon, it is because this is what you want to be doing. Reeds, flag iris, rustle in tongues of green. And if we are faithful, the interpretation will follow. Eros, impulse, desire, 1,000 flickering leaves on fire with love, ceaseless, life, death, that is also love, love without remorse. Only let me listen, and I'll not want, hook me up to the chlorophyll train, and I'll never be the same. A child with no language but empty mouth wide, slack with wonder. I want to cram it all in, pond weed, mire, rotting woodbird song, willow, down bramble, and breeze. Let me get the measure of all. Things by reckless ingestion. How fast the sun sinks into its leaves, dead or alive, is much the same thing out here, and it is all alive. Let me only melt into your green substance, eyes fastened on willow-fringed sky, only chiff-chaff, chiff-chaff, chaff, chiff. Yeah, so Kimberly Gibson Trent says we got a setting and a mood built in the second one, but still no clear human happenings. Yeah, Sheba Soup says this one is easier to follow the through line, but it's still too abstract to relate. Lack of contextual anchoring, intentionally but distractingly abstract. And that's the thing. So if you like poems, poets that are really abstract like that, there has to be kind of a density of language and sort of interesting phrases and images that hold you in and make the poem interesting even without the through line and the anchor. And then we can play with that. I mean, John Ashbery is the poet that we think about the most with this kind of topic or this kind of style of poetry. And let me just pull up a random John Ashbery poem really quick. Let's see what we get just if the old poetry finder. Let me try to find a short one. Let's see. Well, that's too short. I'm trying to find a good one as an example. Hang on, bear with me. Is this too long? Okay, this is last month. And this is how it works with the old John Ashbery. We have this sense here where we don't have a context and we're sort of always like off balance. Like things are hitting us from every place, but the language isn't interesting enough that it holds our attention despite that. It's like the Lewis Carroll Jabberwocky. Even though it's nonsense and babble, it's like a compelling babble because of its use of language and image and all those other facts. And even if it's really hard to find the narrative thread and the thing that holds it all together, we're still interested enough to want to, or at least people who like Ashbery. And that puzzle nature of Ashbery, that really deeper, even if the story could be told on the surface, you get these layers of complexity that people like to untangle if they like that style of poetry. But it's because, as we'll read this and we'll see that, the details in the syntax, the language is surprising and twisting and turning so much that it's fun to read even if we don't know what's going on. So let's see this and we'll just compare it to their poem really quick. Last month, no changes of support, only patches of gray where sunlight fell. The house seems heavier now that they have gone away. In fact, it emptied in record time. When the flat table used to result a match recedes slowly into the night. The academy of the future is opening its doors and willing the fruitless sunlight streams into domes, the chairs piled high with books and papers. The sedate one is this month's skittish one, confirming the property that a timeless value has changed hands. And you could have a new automobile, ping-pong set, and garage, but the thief stole everything like a miracle. In his book, there was a picture of treason only, and in the garden, cries and colors. And so, yeah. Kimberly Gibson Trance says, but in the Ashbury poem, we still get snippets of context. The house heavier after people leaving. Yeah, we get these little snippets. And it's like this collage of context. I really feel like he, I don't know what his process is. I think I mentioned this on the Poetry Space at one point. I don't know when we were talking about Ashbury, but I feel like he has like a real story that he like intentionally cuts up and scatters around, and then he just picks some of the pieces from it. And there's always a sense that that there's something behind it, and we don't quite know what. But it's because the language is so interesting. You know, this sentence in his book, there was a picture of treason only, and in the garden, cries and colors. Like, that is a really interesting sentence. I don't know what it means, but I want to know what it means. And if you're going to have a poem that's this abstract, you need to be that concrete. There's a book with a picture of treason only. And in the garden, cries and colors. It has to be that, like, interesting, like that unusual, to make us want to try to pull meaning out of it. In any sentence, you can just pick a random sentence. The Academy of the Future is opening its doors and willing the fruitless sunlight streams into domes. The chairs piled high with books and papers. So just calling it the Academy of the Future is an interesting phrase. Opening its doors and willing the fruitless sunlight streams. Like, that's really interesting, even though I have no idea what he's talking about. And so we need that that level of detail in order to keep the poem compelling enough that we want to read. Yeah. Kimberly Gibson Trent says, the thief stole everything like a miracle. That's a great line too. I think it's my favorite line in the poem, so thanks for pointing that out. Where was it? Yeah, ping pong set in garage, but the thief stole everything like a miracle. And here, but the thief stole everything is sort of something anybody would say. But then the thief stole everything like a miracle, like makes that so interesting and unusual that it's compelling. And that's why this kind of abstract type poetry works. But you have to do that. And if you're not going to tell the story straight, if you're going to be abstract and hard to follow and not know the context, you have to give us so much that we want to stay with you anyway. And that's the takeaway I wanted to leave for this. So if you go back and look at this, I'm not going to read the whole thing again because we're getting late, but it has that somewhere, willow feathers whisper what? The business at the root is so obvious. So the business at the root is a really interesting phrase, but it's so obvious it doesn't need to be said. I mean, that's just that there's nothing to grab onto there. So you're kind of losing us. It doesn't have the density. If the whole thing was the same kind of strangeness as the business at the root, that would be more, that would work more. Tracks and ragged duckweed where they pass, and the stilt leg heron stalks beyond the tangled island and sanctuary. Yeah. Brandon Sullivan says, like Ashbury Sestina, farm implements and rutabagas in the landscape. It's nonsense, but it's awe-inspiring and has all the Popeye references you could possibly want. Yeah, and that's the thing. They're just, you gotta cram a lot of stuff in. And, sanctuary on its own, is not enough. Like, it's not enough for a line in a poem like this if we're going to be that distant. We have to have a surprise and a twist and something gripping and unusual in every turn, or else we're going to be turned off and bored. Wayne the Poet says, I had this discussion with C.K. Williams in a workshop. He does not care for surrealist poetry. C.K. wants something tangible. Yeah, I think, we love to hear each other's stories, and just telling the story is the easiest way to be engaging. But there's other ways too. And I think, Ashbury does it. A lot of other poets do it too with the abstract, but they have to be offering something else. Let's see. Sun through ever shifting slivers of willow, green, and gold. I mean, that could be good, but then we go on this green and silver, and at our feet, the rotting things rot, collapsing into silt, all things becoming one thing. I mean, there's not a lot of surprise in the in the syntax and the way the language is structured, PMB says most abstract artists don't start out abstract. They master formality and then deconstruct. Yeah, that's a good point too. Okay, well anyway, so the point is here, it's too long and it's not dense enough to carry this thread of how abstract it's going. We need, like, take the best lines here, and I don't know if this is Ashbery's technique, I don't know how he does it, but if you cut out all the stuff that's not compelling, the eros, impulse, desire, 1,000 flickering leaves on fire with love, ceaseless, life, death, it's also love without remorse. Like, that's boring. There's other lines that are really good. If you just take that, the chlorophyll train is a cool line. If you take just those and condense it, maybe it'll work in this kind of level. But right now it's sort of too strung out to be engaging. The other way to go, though, is to let us in on the story, which what I tend to prefer. Anyway, that's going to do it for the critique. Thanks, everybody, for helping out and sharing your work. All the poets who did. There's Joanna Hope Britcher sharing that one. And thanks, everybody, for leaving as many comments. If you haven't clicked the like button yet, please do. That's always helpful to get the channel with more views and whatnot. But thanks. Now, let's see. So Katie's prompt for this week on the Rattlecast, I'll start out with that. You can write your poems. I don't remember it. I remember it was to end with a question. But what was the rest of it? Let's see. The prompt was, write a poem that includes a prank and ends with a question. So a prank. Interesting. For April Fool's Day, I guess. Write a poem that includes a prank and ends with a question. That's Katie's prompt for this week. And let's see. Where's my tunes? Okay, there's my music. And the guest for this week on the Rattlecast is going to be, I should say, speaking of Katie, the Poetry Space is out today. The second half of How to Be Interesting in a Poem. That's Katie's podcast that she does. Now, the guest on the Rattlecast this week is going to be, that's a little loud. There we go. The next guest is going to be Partridge Boswell. So Partridge's got a few chapbooks and books. Some Far Country is the most recent book, winner of the, I can't remember which prize, it's too small to read. But Partridge is a musician poet from our musician issue. He's in the band Los Lorcas. And they tour and play this kind of really intricate sort of folk version, combining poetry with music in an interesting way. It's a trio. It tours a lot, has a lot of shows. That's Partridge Boswell going to be the guest, the leader, I think, of Los Lorcas. It's going to be interesting to talk music and poetry this weekend. That's Rattlecast 288, Sunday, April 6th, the regular time, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. Hope to see you there. Hope you have a great weekend in the meantime, and we'll talk to you later. Goodbye.